The main cast of JoJo's Bizarre Adventure Part 3 Stardust Crusaders is possibly one of the most diverse casts in all of JoJo, with everyone spanning from different walks of life, from the Egyptian fortune teller Muhammad Abdal to the Japanese Bancho delinquent in Jotaro Kujo, and even the French traveling warrior Jean-Pierre Polnareff. Everyone in this group was rather distinct, though among its large cast contains possibly one of the most unique perspectives in the whole of the series, this being the Boston Terrier with his own terror on two tires, Iggy and his stand, the Fool. Iggy was a member of the main cast of Part 3 and introduced halfway through the part, though to call him a full-on Crusader would be a little bit difficult, as he made it pretty clear from the get-go that he had no stakes in whether the Crusaders succeeded in their mission or not, as he would basically disappear from the plot from time to time and wander Egypt to his leisure, because he knows no one could stop him. And while throughout most of the part he refused to be tamed and was treated like a delinquent, at the end of the part they grew to accept this aspect of Iggy and understood why he acted the way he did. Though before we get too into that, let's first discuss the meaning behind his name and design. So like a lot of characters in early JoJo, Iggy's name is in direct reference to a famous musician that Araki was listening to at the time of writing. In the case of Iggy, he gets his name from the godfather of punk and the voice of the hugely influential band, the Stooges, this being James Newell Austenberg Jr., better known by his stage name, Iggy Pop. Now, Iggy Pop is the quintessential punk rock star, and his career is something that cannot be ignored, as his attitude on stage revolutionized what a musician could get away with, as not only did he do so to stamp out the ideals of the hippie movement in music, which found its audience back in the 60s, but him performing shirtless and engaging in gross-out activities like rolling around in broken glass, or exposing himself to the crowd, really made him stand out among those musicians. He even popularized things such as the stage dive. Iggy Pop became the musical equivalent of a raw force of nature, and fans found themselves coming to Stooges concerts partly just to see what Iggy would do next. And one of the first songs released by the Stooges is called I Wanna Be Your Dog, which is a song that Iggy feels that if he plays, will always rekindle his energy for stage antics. Along with this, Iggy Pop also had a long-lasting friendship with David Bowie, and had him on multiple times for albums such as The Idiot or Lust for Life, but most importantly is one of his most influential songs of all time, that being Search and Destroy on the Raw Power album. Now, Iggy the dog clearly represents elements of Iggy Pop's own career in his status and actions throughout the part. I mean, Iggy literally comes off as one of your typical punk characters. Similar but different to Jotaro himself, with Iggy even being an aggressive and anti-authoritarian force in the story that plays by his own rules, along with him being much smarter than most people give him credit for. Along with this, he's also well known for gross-out stunts like jumping onto someone's face, eating their hair, and then farting in it, which matches up very well with Iggy Pop's own stage antics. Iggy is also extremely prideful and looking to just live a life where he's happy, damn be the consequences. Also, given that I Wanna Be Your Dog is such an important song for Iggy Pop's persona, I think that it might have played a role in why Araki selected Iggy's name for the dog. Though it should be stated that a lot of Iggy's role in the story was not decided from the start. As Araki knew that he wanted to have an animal companion join the Crusaders at some point, he didn't exactly know who or when. But by the time he had reached Egypt and introduced a whole new set of enemies, he decided it'd be best to introduce a new ally as well. Though the reason he selected a dog to join the party is because he understood that they are considered loyal animals and easy for the reader to grow attached to really fast when reading. He was also excited to work with animals as both allies and enemies because it allowed him to research facts about animals for the manga itself. You can actually see this done quite a bit in the pet shop fight where he keeps pointing out facts about a falcon. Though when specifically working with Iggy, Araki noted Silverfang the Shooting Star Jean by Yoshihiro Takahashi as one of the main inspirations for his work. Though instead of selecting an Akatani Inu for Iggy's breed, he instead went with one of the most popular dog breeds in America, as Iggy was an American dog, this being the Boston Terrier, which was renowned for its loyalty, intelligence, and overall kind nature, even being nicknamed the American Gentleman. Though, one of the reasons they selected this dog breed was because it was black and white, making it easier to draw in manga. Though true to Araki's style, Iggy's debut is very similar in manner to Jotaro's, making it clear from the get-go that this dog wasn't going gonna be like the previous dogs in JoJo. This dog walked to its own tune, and one of the reasons it's able to maintain this punk lifestyle is thanks to its own powerful stand ability, the Fool. The Fool is a close-range materialization stand which doesn't have a main body of its own, but instead often forms one out of the sand in the given area. The body it creates is a large, mostly mechanical canine with thick hind leg wheels that offer Iggy very good mobility. The creation process, Araki explains, starts out with the dog as its base, then he added a large Kachina mask, or Native American spirit mask, which ties Iggy to his American origins and the spiritual nature of stands, but then he added the finishing touches of race car wheels as the back legs, to give the stand a very fast look. But it was also because at the time that Part 3 was running in Shonen Jump, they had become a sponsor for a Formula 1 racing team. I believe it was McLaren. So it actually was commonplace to implement race cars somewhere in your manga in some way. There's actually a pretty popular picture that Akira Toriyama drew. And also, Araki mentioned that the overall mechanical side of the Fool stems from his viewpoint on stands as a whole, viewing them as inorganic beings that are fueled by life force, similar to how a car is fueled by gasoline. And while there's a lot that went into the Fool's overall design, what makes it so strong is actually how simple the power ends up being. That ability is total sand manipulation. This ability allows the Fool to freely manipulate and mold sand however it wants, and under the effects of the Fool, sand itself doesn't operate like normal sand anymore, as Iggy can change the density and dryness of it at will, allowing him to create weapons from sand and even hold things in the air. And because of this simplicity, the Fool's ability gives Iggy a wide variety of options outside of offensive ones, such as creating doppelgangers or body doubles of either himself to trick attackers or someone else to get a sneak attack, which is seen best when he creates a fake Dio to sneak up on Vanilla Ice. Which, in a way, actually works very well with Iggy's namesake, as Iggy Pop was good friends with Bowie, and they worked together on songs such as Seek and Destroy, and Dio's design is heavily inspired by Bowie himself. So this can sort of be seen as Iggy and Dio working together, even though that's not technically Dio. Along with this, the sand can also be changed into tools, like an air glider to keep Iggy off the ground, or a shield that can protect him from projectile-based attacks, including stand-based ones. And this is what makes the Fool such an amazing defensive option, as its lack of an actual body, since the body it uses is created from sand, means that no damage inflicted onto the stand will be transferred to Iggy, like a regular stand would, or vice versa, leading both Avdol and Jotaro to recognize the stand's infinite potential and consider it to be really powerful. Jotaro even saying that he isn't sure if he could beat Iggy himself, which plays into Iggy's ego as he considers his own stand to be as strong and reliable as Jotaro and Star Platinum. Now, the Fool's name, like the good majority of stand names in the earlier half of Part 3, is based on the tarot. The Fool itself plays into the stand's own limitless potential, which in part is a happy coincidence on Araki's part, as it's a rather interesting part of Iggy's own history, because much like himself, the Fool wasn't planned from the beginning to be an ally stand. Its name was just given to Iggy because it was the last card Araki had left to assign to someone that wasn't the world, and it was even almost chosen to be an enemy stand user's instead, making me believe that at some point, Endul's Geb was called the Fool. Though, he admits that while this is a coincidence, he feels that Iggy and his stand match up very well with the Fool nonetheless. And this is because the Fool is the very beginning of the tarot, it being 0 in the number order, and iconic with new starts and infinite possibilities that come with a person's journey through life. The Fool being a moldable stand reflects this, though the Fool also works with Iggy as well, as he himself matches up very well with interpretations of readings of the card, as the reverse reading of the Fool speaks of chaos and lack of direction, and Iggy acts as that force of chaos sometimes, only assisting the Crusaders by accident as he wanders aimlessly around Egypt, as intent is not a strong element of anyone who represents the Fool. Many things that the Fool does is done in fact by accident, so if they do something good, it doesn't tend to come from a place of altruism or personal benefit, and similar to that, if they do something bad or hurt someone, it also happens without any planned reason or malice. This is due to a lack of direction, and how everything that comes from a fool comes from its reaction and coincidences, which makes Iggy's own creation somewhat of a beautiful thing that perfectly matches with the stand that he was assigned. Another aspect that Iggy represents is the fool's whole aspect of self-importance, as while the fool is expected to grow, it places the self or one's ego above all other things, as you always have yourself to fall back on in the end. And due to his upbringing, Iggy reflects this aspect of the tarot quite well, as from a young age he was spoiled, being brought up and raised by an elderly rich man in New York City, though when the old man's age started to show its signs, Iggy lost any respect for him, viewing most humans as easy marks or tools to be taken advantage of to get anything that he wants. Though his spoiled lifestyle and ego didn't make Iggy soft, he was aggressive enough that his stare was enough to unsettle those around him, and he would enter the mean streets of New York. Here, Iggy would forge his own kingdom of stray dogs, being able to overwhelm anyone who stood in his path to success. This included humans as well, as any normal human who would try to capture him, be it animal control or otherwise, was no match for Iggy. I mean, from his perspective, he was just so much more powerful than any normal person thanks to his stand, though soon Iggy's easy life would be grounded to a halt as he confronted Joseph Abdal and the Speedwagon Foundation after the word of a rebellious psychic dog evading capture reached them. And after a long battle with the dog, they managed to get Iggy into a cage where they were able to finally calm him down by offering his soon-to-be favorite snack, coffee-flavored gum. And soon he would be shipped across the world in order to help in a battle against Dio and his forces after the word of the Egyptian god stand users had reached the Crusaders. So to understand this from his perspective, Iggy was kidnapped and enlisted into a fight that he had no stakes in. And then he was expected to befriend everyone he arrived there with, and Jotaro was able to understand him and his attitude because of this, as the two of them weren't so different. In fact, a lot of Jotaro's character is seen in Iggy's, from the subversion of expectations in their introduction, to hiding behind a persona that masks their real emotions, and both of them share a similar color palette as well. And this seems to result in Jotaro being one of the only Crusaders that Iggy respects, though of course he still considers himself to be superior. And this sense of superiority comes from his own pride, as while he was spoiled as a puppy, Iggy proved that he could earn everything himself. Yet no one respected him for that, and in return, he respected no one. Though he wasn't heartless, showing a soft side for dog lovers when he jumped in to rescue a kid who was being attacked by Pet Shop, which resulted in Iggy getting more involved than he ever wanted to be in this fight against Dio, and in turn resulted in one of the best fights in the entirety of Part 3, Iggy overcoming the odds and finally motivated by his injuries to continue his fight with the Crusaders, which again works with Iggy's own pride, as instead of wanting to insist in Dio's defeat for the sake of the Crusaders, instead he is going after Dio based on his own desire for revenge. Iggy is defiant to the very end, and this is seen in his last encounter with Vanilla Ice, as not only does the anime include a great scene which captures Iggy's personality perfectly, where in the middle of getting his shit kicked in, he looks up at Vanilla Ice and smirks, knowing that he got the better of him by making him lose his cool, before promptly being kicked a few more times, but also in his final moment, with Polnareff telling Iggy to save his strength and not to waste it saving him. Not being one to follow orders, Iggy instead uses the remainder of his life force to lift Polnareff off the ground and avoid Vanilla Ice's own final attack, which in turn resulted in his own death, but gave Polnareff the upper hand against Vanilla Ice, allowing them to defeat the user soon after. Though this sacrifice comes from something beyond just Iggy's own defiance of authority, as Iggy also does this because he views Polnareff's own sacrifice as a sign of respect towards Iggy. And in that moment, Polnareff, someone who has done nothing besides butt heads with Iggy, recognizes him as his equal, and living up to his nature as a dog, Iggy saves those who are loyal to him, even at the cost of his own life. Iggy is one of the best characters in Part 3, and my personal favorite Crusader. He's someone who played by his own beat, and while you could describe him as an asshole, the reason for him being one is completely justifiable. Also, I love his evolution in design throughout the whole of Part 3. Starting out as a regular, if not a bit ugly looking dog, that slowly morphed and changed bit by bit with every appearance, until his own personal arc against Pet Shop, where we finally get a glimpse into his head and see what he's thinking, which in turn humanizes customizes him a significant amount, thus leading to his final design, which, having characters physically change in appearance to match narrative elements in the story, is something that Araki does a lot in JoJo, especially in his next part, Part 4. Though, almost all aspects of this part of Iggy's character is completely cut from the OVA version of the part. And speaking of Iggy's appearance outside of Part 3 originally, he has been playable in just about every multiplayer game in the JoJo franchise, appearing in just about every fighting game as well, with the thought of balance be damned. He was even given a parody of a famous fighting game move in Heritage for the Future, where Iggy performs the famous Raging Demon attack, so much so that there's actually an unused gag where the kanji for Inu, or dog, would appear on screen in a similar way that the Heaven kanji appears when Akuma does the attack. Along with this, Iggy has also played a pretty good role in the Part 3 light novel, Genesis of the Universe. And of course, Iggy also has an amazing character theme performed by Coda called Iggy Walk, which summarizes his whole personality into a jazzy beat that captures just every feeling that Iggy is as a whole. I recommend checking it out. And while a lot of Iggy wasn't planned from the start, his role in the part proves that not everything needs to be, as he is a really enjoyable addition to the story that really cemented Part 3's legend, along the while opening the door to Araki to have even more bizarre things in the future. And speaking of Araki, Iggy had an effect on his own creator, saying that while working on Part 3, and Iggy specifically, Araki had wished that he could get a dog just like him, but wasn't able to because he knew he wouldn't be able to take care of him well enough, which is also probably why Iggy keeps making appearances in promotional work years after he had already passed. He has become just as much a part of the Stardust Crusaders' legacy as Jotaro himself has. And with that all said and done, if you enjoyed this video and want to see more videos like it in the future, I have a Patreon at patreon.com/MediNotTheBadGuy. And if you don't want to look like a fool, you can avoid this by buying a copy of Shimonetta, A Boring World Where the Concept of Dirty Jokes Doesn't Exist at buyshimonetta.com.